She was not just a poet, she was a presence. She did not just speak truth, she became it. Maya Angelou was more than her words. She was a force, a walking revolution. A soul that sang even when the cage was locked tight. And if you've ever felt a flame in your chest that refused to die, if you've ever stood trembling, but still chose to speak, you may just carry her spirit. Here are 5 signs you do. 1. You turn pain into power. There are some people who carry a quiet fire within them, a fire not born from privilege or ease, but from pressure, from pain, from the long aching echo of things they never asked for but had to survive anyway. Maya Angelou was one of them. She did not grow strong in safety. She grew strong in silence, in stolen childhoods and suffocating rooms, in the kind of pain that wraps around your throat and tells you, never speak again. And for 6 years, she didn't. Maya Angelou once said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." But let us not miss the miracle. She didn't let the silence win. She turned her silence into song, her wounds into words, her grief into a gift. That's the first sign you carry Maya Angelou's spirit. You turn your pain into power. You do not deny what happened. You do not decorate it, disguise it, or run from it. You name it, you face it. And then, with trembling hands and a burning will, you alchemize it. You take what tried to break you and instead make it the very thing that builds you. That is the kind of strength the world doesn't recognize on sight. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's real. It's the kind of power forged in the fires of betrayal, in the loneliness of abandonment, in the rubble of lost innocence, and yet you rise. Again and again, you rise. Because pain, in your hands, is no longer just a wound, it's a weapon. Not to hurt, but to heal, to defend the broken, to right what others fear to speak, to shine light on what has lived too long in shadow. You carry Maya's spirit if you know what it's like to be dismissed, to be discarded, to be silenced, and yet somehow, instead of becoming bitter, you became brave. You learned to speak, even when your voice trembled. You learned to love even when you hadn't been loved right. You learned to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because you deserved peace. And you didn't do it all at once. No one becomes strong overnight. You did it piece by piece, tear by tear, step by uncertain step. Sometimes you healed in secret, with no one watching, no one clapping. Just you and the ache. You and the memory. You in the sacred, unseen battle of becoming whole. And still, you kept going. You are not here by accident. You are not whole today because life was kind. You are whole today because you refuse to stay shattered. You carry Maya's spirit if your pain has become your platform, not for pity, but for purpose. You speak now for those who can't. You write for those who've been erased. You fight for the dignity of people who've been made invisible, because you know what it's like to feel invisible. You know what it's like to be misunderstood, marginalized, missed. But you did not let that define you. You let it refine you, like Maya. You understood this one truth. What tried to bury you didn't know you were a seed. Every no became a reason. Every rejection became a redirection. Every heartbreak became holy ground. You took the ashes and made art. You took the grief and gave birth to wisdom. You took what should have ended you and made it the beginning of something deeper. That is power. That is poetry. That is Maya, and that is you. Turning pain into power does not mean forgetting. It means remembering with clarity instead of captivity. It means letting your story breathe, not bleed. It means being able to say, yes, it happened, but it didn't end me. It transformed me. And now, I will transform others. You carry Maya's spirit if you've stopped asking, why me, and started saying, use me, God. Use my story. Use my struggle. Use every dark night and hard lesson to bring light to someone else. Use my past not as a prison, but as a platform for purpose. Because Maya's gift was not just that she healed, but that she helped others heal. She walked into rooms with elegance, with scars dressed in silk, and with a voice that had once been silenced. Now carrying nations, and maybe your voice isn't on stages. Maybe your poetry lives in journals. Maybe your power shows up in the way you raise your children. The way you hold space for a friend. The way you walk into a workplace with integrity and light. That's Maya. 2. Because her spirit was never about performance, it was about presence. It was about showing up with wholeness in a world that expects brokenness, and you do that every day. So, if you've taken your hardest experiences and used them as the soil for growth, if you've turned your suffering into service, your trauma into teaching, your heartbreak into healing, then. Beloved, you carry Maya's legacy. You are walking proof that pain doesn't get the final word, that silence can be shattered, that beauty can rise from ashes, and that sometimes, the most powerful voices are born in the quietest, darkest places. 2. You know that stillness is strength ***. There is a power that moves quietly. It does not shout, it does not boast, it does not demand the room's attention. But when it enters, the atmosphere shifts, the noise falters, the chaos stands still. It is the power of stillness, and Maya Angelou understood it well. She didn't always speak to be heard. Sometimes she paused, deeply, deliberately, as if time itself needed a moment to catch up with her spirit. When she entered a room, she brought with her not just wisdom, but weight, a gravity wrapped in grace, a calm that commanded more than applause, it commanded respect. Because stillness, in Maya's hands, was not passivity. It was poise, it was presence, it was power under perfect control. You carry Maya's spirit if you've learned that silence is not the absence of strength, it is its cradle, its throne. You understand that stillness is not weakness, and quiet is not retreat. In fact, your stillness is a decision, a discipline, a divine rebellion against a world that worships noise. You see, strength isn't always a clenched fist. Sometimes, it's an unclenched jaw, a deep breath before the reply, a refusal to flinch when provoked. It is the wisdom to know that not every battle deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your response. Not every fire is yours to fight. There is a warrior in you, yes, but there is also a sanctuary. And you have learned how to guard it. You don't give your peace to panic. You don't give your emotions to every wind that blows. You don't perform for approval or chase every invitation to argue. Why? Because you've built something to sacred inside yourself to let it be shaken by every storm outside. Stillness is the posture of those who have already overcome. It is the language of those who no longer have to prove who they are. It is what Maya carried in every step, the quiet confidence of a woman who knew herself. You carry her spirit if you've learned how to sit with your thoughts, how to hold space for your own soul, how to say, "I'll wait," when the world screams, react. This world moves fast. It confuses motion with meaning. It praises the loudest voice and overlooks the deepest one. But you've learned that truth doesn't always raise its voice, it just stands, still, unbothered, rooted, and when the storm comes, you don't run, you anchor, you breathe, you listen, you discern. Because those who carry Maya's spirit don't just speak with power. They pause with purpose. They know the sacred rhythm of restraint. They know how to wait in the spirit, how to let the answer rise like a slow dawn instead of a flashing fire. You see, stillness gives birth to clarity. And clarity is more precious than speed. Maya's stillness wasn't just about how she moved, it was about how she endured. She did not flail. She did not shout every pain. She held her head like a crown was resting there, because it was. She wore her dignity like armor, quiet, steady, unshakable, and you carry that same grace. That same spiritual muscle that holds its ground when the world pushes. You know that there's strength in restraint. That emotional maturity is not the loud eruption, but the measured exhale. That power doesn't always push, sometimes it waits. Sometimes, it lets the foolishness collapse on its own. Sometimes, it just watches the chaos pass by like a storm. Knowing the roots go deep. You carry Maya's spirit if you've learned that rest is not laziness, it is wisdom. That solitude is not isolation, it is intimacy. That silence is not emptiness, it is presence. You've learned that God moves in whispers, not always in thunder. And sometimes, the greatest power move is simply being still enough to hear Him. Stillness is the place where you recalibrate. It's where your soul aligns with something eternal. Where the weight of the world lifts just enough for you to remember who you are, and whose you are. And in that remembering, you return to yourself. Whole, unshaken, unhurried. You see, Maya didn't need to compete. She didn't hustle to belong. She knew she was ordained. Her stillness was not empty. It was full of knowing. And you, too, are learning that rhythm. You are learning to move from rest, not rest from exhaustion. You are learning to walk with wisdom, not race with the world. You've become fluent in the sacred pause. You've learned that some of the greatest miracles happen not in noise, but in quiet surrender. Not in chaos, but in calm. And that's not weakness, that's legacy. So yes, you carry Maya Angelou's spirit if you can stand still and be unshaken. If you can sit in silence and still feel full. If you can slow your breath in the middle of the whirlwind and say, "Peace," Be still. Not just to the storm outside, but to the storm within, because stillness is not something you wait for, it's something you choose. And when you do, you discover a secret strength that cannot be measured by movement. You discover the divine within, and that is Maya, and that is you. You rise, no matter what asterisk, there is a certain kind of soul the world cannot keep down. You can press them, but they will not break. You can bury them, but they will bloom anyway. You can write them off, lock the door, walk away, but when you look again, they are standing. Maybe not spotless. Maybe not smiling, but standing. Nonetheless, that is the spirit of resilience. That is the legacy of Maya Angelou. She did not float through life on soft pillows and smooth paths. No, she walked through fire and kept her poetry intact. She was knocked down by life's brutality more than once, abandoned, abused, silenced, misunderstood. She was tossed into the storm. But she came out singing. She did not just survive, she rose. You carry Maya's spirit if you rise, even when you're tired. Even when you're underestimated. Even when nothing around you looks like hope, but hope lives inside you anyway. You rise when you shouldn't. You rise when they said you couldn't. You rise when the world gave you every reason to quit, and you whispered, "Watch me." Maya wrote it best. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. And dust is quiet, unassuming, overlooked, but dust always rises. It lifts with the wind. It refuses to stay buried. It moves again and again, never asking permission to exist. That is you. You carry the grace of survival that does not scream, but lives, moves, speaks, anyway. You know what it is to be counted out, to be told you're too much, or not enough. Too loud, too quiet, too complicated, too soft, too black, too broken, too bold, too brave, but you keep showing up. Not because it's easy, but because something inside you refuses to give up. You've lived through the days that tried to steal your breath, nights that stole your peace, seasons that emptied you out completely. But here you are, still breathing, still healing, still rising. Not all rising looks like applause. Sometimes it's just getting out of bed. Sometimes it's choosing not to respond in anger. Sometimes it's telling your story without shame. Sometimes it's sitting in the dark and still believing in the light. Maya knew that kind of rising. The private kind, the invisible victories, the uncelebrated comebacks, and, if you know them too, you are walking in her footsteps. You see, to rise is not to pretend. It is not about smiling through the ache or wearing masks that say, "I'm fine." To rise is to feel everything and still stand up. To rise is to carry the scar and still choose softness. To rise is to be disappointed and still choose hope. To rise is to be wounded and still choose to love again. To trust again, to try again. You rise not because the pain didn't happen, but because you refuse to let it define you. You carry Maya's spirit if you know that your dignity does not depend on the opinions of others. It does not shrink when you fall. It does not vanish when you're vulnerable. You are not here to live beneath what you've been through. You are here to rise because of it. Maya rose from silence into song. From trauma into teaching. From rejection into revelation. She was not bitter, she was bold. Not vengeful, but victorious. Not hardened by her past, but softened enough to write with grace and fire. You carry her legacy when you get back up after life knocks you down, not with resentment, but with a deeper sense of who you are. Rising is not just about strength. It's about memory. It's about remembering what you were made for. It's about remembering that no matter how heavy the weight, your spirit is stronger. And some days, rising looks like defiance. Not of people, but of despair. It's saying, "You may have hurt me, but you will not have me." It's saying, "I am not what I lost. I am what I found in the fire." You carry Maya's spirit if you rise with wisdom. If you rise with purpose. If you rise not just for yourself, but for others watching in silence, waiting to see if they can, too, because when you rise, you give others permission. When you rise, you break generational chains. When you rise, you remind the world that pain doesn't get the final word. Hope does. The world we live in tries to name you by your wounds, but you know better. You name yourself by your resilience, your laughter, your light, your love. You name yourself by the way you keep rising, not to prove anything, but to fulfill something deeper. A divine calling, a sacred strength that cannot be manufactured, only earned. So yes, you carry the spirit of Maya Angelou if your soul has ever whispered, "I don't know how, but I'm getting back up." If your heart has ever said, "They didn't believe." in me, but I believe in me. If your breath has ever declared, "Today, I rise," then you are part of her echo. You are part of her prophecy. You are part of the generation who refuses to stay small. Because rising is not just what you do, it is who you are. It is how you worship, how you love, how you live. So rise, dear soul, rise from shame, rise from grief, rise from exhaustion, rise from the labels they gave you. Rise from the fear that stalks you. Rise from the doubt that dims you. And when you do, rise not just for survival, but for glory. Because you were born for it. And like Maya before you, you are proof that still, like dust, you rise. You speak for more than just yourself ***. There are voices. And then there are echoes. Voices fade, but echoes, they linger. They stretch across time and space. They do not die when the speaker falls silent. They live on in every soul that ever felt seen by their sound. Maya Angelou was not just a voice. She was an echo. She didn't speak only for herself. She spoke for us. For every woman who'd been silenced. For every child who carried shame. For every soul who had been dismissed, diminished, or denied. Her voice wrapped around the forgotten and said, "You are not invisible?" You carry Maya's spirit if your voice holds weight, not just because it is loud, but because it is anchored in truth. Because it includes others. Because when you speak, you carry more than your own name. You carry history. You carry community. You carry responsibility. You speak for the broken because you've been broken. You speak for the voiceless because you remember what it felt like to be silent. You speak not to shine the light on yourself, but to shine the light forward, so others can walk, so others can see, so others can say, if they made it, maybe I can too. You carry Maya's spirit if you know your story is not a trophy, it's a bridge. You don't tell it for applause, you tell it for awakening. You share your scars not to be admired, but to be understood. You speak so that silence loses its grip on someone else. You speak because your voice may unlock a prison someone else has been trapped in. That's what Maya did, and that's what you do whether you realize it yet or not. Because you've come to understand this truth, courage is contagious, and every time you open your mouth with honesty, someone else finds the permission to do the same. Your healing ripples, your truth multiplies. Your vulnerability creates safety for others, and that is no small thing. That is how legacies are born. You carry Maya's spirit if you don't just speak, you stand. Stand for justice. Stand for the overlooked. Stand for the uncomfortable truths that the world wants to sweep under the rug. You know that silence, too, can be a kind of violence, so you choose words. Not careless ones. Not cruel ones, but truthful ones. Words dipped in fire and grace. Words that challenge and comfort. Words that hold mirrors and make room. Maya Angelou didn't speak for attention, she spoke with intention. With deep, sacred resolve. Her words weren't just poems, they were protests. They were prayers. They were promises to every wounded soul that said, "You are seen. You are sacred. You belong. You carry that spirit." If your voice holds memory. If your words carry the rhythm of more than just your own story. If your truth trembles with the weight of many names, many journeys, many wounds, not all your own. Because the moment you started speaking from that place, your voice stopped being singular. It became a chorus, and still, your voice may not always be met with applause. Sometimes it will be met with silence, or with resistance, or with misunderstanding. But you keep speaking. Because you are not here for popularity. You are here for purpose, and when you speak from that well deep, still, ancient, you don't just sound wise. You sound eternal. You carry Maya's spirit. If you understand that your words are not just sound waves, they are soul waves, they carry vibration. They carry vibration. They carry transformation. You don't just speak to be heard. You speak to heal. You speak to shift atmospheres. You speak to say what some cannot yet say for themselves. Maybe you speak through poetry. Maybe through preaching. Maybe through music. Maybe through mothering. Maybe through one-on-one conversations. Over coffee. But when you speak, people don't just hear you, they feel seen, they feel known, they feel remembered, they feel human again. That is sacred. That is holy. That is Maya. Your voice is no accident. It has been shaped in silence, sharpened in struggle, softened in sorrow. And now, it rises, strong but tender, bold but humble, clear but compassionate. You carry Maya's spirit if you've ever felt the responsibility of being a voice in a room where none were heard. If you've ever used your platform, big or small, to uplift those who had none. If you've ever spoken up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. And even if your knees shook, you still said it. That is strength. That is legacy. That is love. Because love, in its highest form, speaks. It doesn't stay silent while others suffer. It doesn't remain neutral in the face of injustice. It doesn't avoid the hard conversations just to stay comfortable. No. Love opens its mouth and tells the truth, even when it's costly, even when it's complicated, even when it means being misunderstood. You carry Maya's spirit if you've made peace with that. If you've realized that your voice isn't just yours, it's an inheritance, a responsibility, a holy fire. You carry the echoes of those who came before. And you are creating echoes for those who will come after. So speak. Not for fame, not for fear, but for freedom. Speak. And when you do, know this. You are not just one voice. You are a movement, a mirror, a melody. You are Maya's echo. And you speak for more than just yourself. Not all power is loud. Not all strength is force. Not all revolutions wear armor or wield swords. Some revolutions come softly, carried in the arms of fierce love. And Maya Angelou, she loved like that, with fire and grace, with truth and tenderness, with eyes that saw deeper, and words that wrapped around wounds like healing hands. She did not love naively. No, she had been cut, she had been dropped, she had been misnamed, mistaken, misunderstood, and yet she chose to love anyway. She once said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And when Maya spoke, when she smiled, when she stood beside someone, they felt safe, they felt seen, they felt sacred. Because her love was not some soft, passive emotion, it was a force. You carry Maya's spirit if you love in a way that changes the air around you. If your love is not shallow, but rooted, not sugar-coated, but soul-deep, you love in ways that sometimes hurt because your love tells the truth. Your love does not flatter. Your love confronts. But it always covers, always restores, always holds space for redemption. You don't just love when it's easy. You love when it's messy. You love when it's inconvenient. You love when others have stopped, because you have seen too much suffering to waste time with bitterness. You have walked through too many storms to build a life on blame, so now you choose grace. Not grace that forgets, but grace that remembers. And still chooses to move forward. That's what fierce love does. It doesn't erase the wound. It just refuses to let the wound win. You carry Maya's spirit if you've ever chosen forgiveness, not because they asked, not because they changed, but because you needed peace. Because you knew that your freedom was never meant to be chained to someone else's apology. You forgave because you were ready to be free. And it wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, it was strength wrapped in serenity. It was the refusal to let hate make a home in your heart. You carry Maya's spirit if you've loved people who didn't know how to love you back, and yet you didn't let it harden you. Carry her spirit if you've stayed soft in a world that tells you softness is dangerous. You've learned that real power is not in control, it's in compassion. Because there is a deeper kind of love, the kind that listens before it speaks. The kind that shows up when the crowd walks out. The kind that asks nothing in return, and still gives everything. That kind of love is not performative, it's protective. And Maya embodied that love, not just in her words, but in her presence. When she spoke to people, they felt dignity awaken inside of them. They stood taller. They breathed deeper, because her love didn't just comfort, it called forth. She didn't love you into hiding. She loved you into becoming. You carry her spirit if your love does not shrink others, but enlarges them. If your love gives people permission to come out of hiding, to step into their truth, to rise in their worth. Your love is not just about affection, it's about elevation, and yes, that kind of love costs something. It stretches you. It requires courage. It means opening your heart when it would be easier to close it. But you keep showing up. You keep loving people beyond their labels. You keep choosing tenderness in a world that applauds toughness, because you know, love is not weakness. Love is legacy. You carry Maya's spirit if you've ever stood in the face of injustice and still chose compassion. If you've ever been mistreated and still chose mercy. If you've ever seen brokenness in someone and didn't walk away, but leaned in closer, because you know the secret. People don't change because of shame. People change because someone believed they could. That's what Maya did. That's what you do. You believe in second chances, in divine timing, in the quiet miracle of hearts returning home. You are not just a speaker, You are a soul mender, a space her, a heart counter, a lighthouse in the fog of people's pain. You don't need to be loud to be loving. You just need to be there, present, patient, persistent, and one more thing. You love yourself with that same fierce grace. You no longer shame your wounds. You no longer apologize for your softness. You no longer dim your light to make others comfortable. You've learned that loving others well requires first loving yourself rightly, and so you do, not with arrogance, but with honor. You look in the mirror and bless the woman, bless the man, bless the child you once were, bless the survivor you've become. You bless the one who has kept going. You bless the soul that still chooses love. So yes, you carry Maya's spirit if your love is not loud but lasting, not shallow but sacred, not perfect but pure. You carry her spirit if you love in a way that lingers, that heals, that whispers, "You're worthy, you're whole, you're loved still," because fierce grace is not a feeling. It is a decision, a posture, a divine kind of power. And once you've tasted it, once you've chosen it, nothing else will ever satisfy. You are love's echo. You are Maya's continuation. You are the living proof that soft can still be strong, that grace can still be radical, and that love, real love, still changes everything. If these words stirred something in you, if you saw your reflection in the rise, the stillness, the love, then you already carry Maya's fire within. Don't let it flicker quietly, let it blaze. Share this message. Speak your truth. Be someone's echo of courage. Subscribe for more soul-deep storytelling and poetic empowerment. Leave a comment, your voice matters here. And remember, you are not just surviving, you are becoming. You rise, not just for you, but for all who are watching, in silence, waiting for permission to bloom. Now go walk in grace, speak with fire, and never forget, you are the legacy.